Good evening. Welcome to Vampire Reviews. I am the Maven of the Eventide, the expert of the twilight, the guru of the dusk, the maestro of the near dark. Tonight, we discuss Kathryn Bigelow's 1987 film, Near Dark. You know Kathryn Bigelow, right? The first and only woman to ever win the Oscar for Best Director? Well, her solo feature directorial debut was a vampire film, of course. But unlike many other baby filmmakers who launched their careers with vampire passion projects, Bigelow actually didn't originally want to make a vampire movie. No, she wanted to make a Western. But the Western genre was dead, so James Cameron was like, why don't you mix it up with another genre? And since they were a couple years away from getting married, she was like, that's a great idea, Jimmy. And what genre did she choose? Vampires, of course. She'd made a pact with her friend Eric Red to write 2 movies together. He'd direct one, she'd do the other. Near Dark was her baby. But she had to fight hard for it. The only producer who would even take a chance on the film only agreed to let her direct if he could reserve the right to fire her after the first day of dailies. It's not easy being a lady director in Hollywood. She was actually like only the second woman to ever direct a vampire film. This was for the production company DEG, which was on the verge of bankruptcy, and unfortunately, that meant the film got hardly any promotion, a super limited run in theaters, and wound up being a box office flop. They quickly sold it to HBO, which gave it a second life in the age of home video, and it developed quite a cult following. It's had a huge impact on vampire Western films to come, and it's particularly popular with the Vampire the Masquerade crowd as a mood setter. But DEG's bankruptcy is not the only reason most people overlooked this film. Let me tell you a story. A vampire story. The year is 1987. And you have a handsome small-town white boy. One night, he meets a mysterious girl who turns out to be a vampire. But that's okay, because she's actually really nice and sweet and innocent for a vampire, and the boy starts turning into a vampire too. The trouble is, her vampire family is not. No, they're a gang of violent hellraisers, cool guys, completely breaking all your grandmama's vampire tropes and cliches. One of the vampires is a kid, and there's a trailer shot where they come over a hill, all backlit for creepy effect, and someone drives a car through a wall. At first, they seem pretty awesome, because they have this life of freedom and anarchy, and the boy was kind of feeling stifled by his parent. But the boy quickly learns vampire fun is not the kind of fun he really wants. No, they're too scary, too scary. His real family was where he belonged all along. Except for the girl, of course, she's cool. So he finds a way to turn himself and his girlfriend back human, and they live happily ever after as normies, no longer drawn to the night. Yeah. Lost Boys came out a month before Near Dark. And it was just an extreme coincidence both films were so similar. There was no sneaky studio dueling theft stuff going on. But even if Near Dark had come out first and had a marketing budget, there's no way it could have been as successful as Lost Boys. First of all, though they were both rated R, Lost Boys has a distinctly family film flavor. It has preteen appeal with a polished, shiny, totally radical, ultra-hip aesthetic. Near Dark is bleak and gritty and ultra-violent. It's also pretty artsy. Too artsy for most horror fans, and too gory for most art house fans. Its trailer trash dirty redneck vampires could not compete with the popular appeal of Lost Boys glammed out bikers and campy fun. Yeah, there's not much fun in Near Dark at all. Maybe in a universe where Lost Boys never existed, it could have risen as a groundbreaking classic of vampire cinema, but alas. They were actually talking about trying again and remaking Near Dark about 10 years ago, but then Twilight happened, and they scrapped the project because they thought it was too similar. I mean, I get that Lost Boys burned them before, but too similar to Twilight? This movie? just because it has a romance between a human and a vampire, because no vampire movies ever do that. Okay. But that's what they believed. So much so that they released the Blu-ray in 2009 with this cover. Yeah, good luck hooking Twilight fans into buying it with that. The vampires in Near Dark couldn't be more the antithesis of Twilight's flawlessly beautiful, rich and fabulous undead. I mean, the titles are kind of similar. Near Dark is the time of day between sunset and full night. Call it what you want. Twilight, dusk, eventide, magic hour. Kathryn Bigelow sure included a lot of shots of that time of day, despite how the tone of the film itself is more super ultra mega dark. I mean, it's a great time of day. I'm not named after it for nothing. It's the time of day when the bloodsuckers come out. Yes, I am talking about mosquitoes. The mosquito ranks just under leeches in my personal blood drinker hierarchy. The film opens at that near dark hour with a shot of a mosquito that was so important to Bigelow's cinematic vision that she spent 6 months growing a mosquito from scratch so she'd have a healthy one that could bite her actor without danger of contamination. This farm lad is Caleb. His dad's a cow veterinarian, and Caleb wishes he could be 1,000 miles away from his dull country life. This is May, a vampire on the prowl for her evening meal.
Have a bite?
Bite?
Just dying for a cone.
Dying.
Vampire puns. But there's something about Caleb that makes May not want to kill him, so she just bites him and runs away. Could it be the pushy way he's sleazing on her? The way he demands she kiss him or he'll refuse to drive her home? What a romantic guy. Yeah, our hero's a creep, but that's the point. He starts off pretty awful and grows into a good person who values love over lust by the end. Bigelow says the reason she abandoned most traditional tropes for her vampires was because she wanted to focus on what they metaphorically represented. And according to her, that's the grave consequence of love and attraction. Remember, this story started as a Western. The classic Western cliche is pretty black and white, good versus evil. Literally. The bad cowboys always wear black hats and the good cowboys always wear white hats. What makes this vampire Western more nuanced, less black and white, less light and dark, just near dark, is that Caleb crosses over to the night and actually gets to find out what it's like to be a vampire instead of just fearing them. After May's bite turns him, the vampire family abducts him. He lives with them, discovers their complexities, their emotional baggage, feels like he belongs with them. Despite how remorselessly murderous they are and how he can't bring himself to kill, he develops sympathy for them. Their family dynamic offers him a sense of community that his previous life lacked. Though they kill people, they always look out for each other. They have family values, clearly craving some sense of humanity. And even though they aren't romanticized in any way, the audience can't help feeling a bit of sympathy for them too. If nothing else, sorry for their lifestyle. We see how hard it is for them. Near Dark reinvented the vampire by stripping away the cinematic cliches of gothic glamour. These poor monsters have nothing but the clothes on their backs and the guns in their holsters. They are constantly on the run for their crime sprees and live a desperate, bleak, pathetic, filthy existence for eternity. What a dismal on life. The only cliche the film keeps besides blood drinking and immortality is the aversion to sunlight. And it uses the contrast of daylight and night constantly to emphasize the loneliness and isolation of the vampire's world. As Caleb turns into a vampire, he smokes and suffers in the sunlight that's simultaneously nourishing the very field he's running across, the field that provides his human livelihood as a farmer. As the vampires pull him into their Winnebago of darkness, he loses his cowboy hat, symbolically leaving behind his previous identity.
I can't believe it myself. I ain't a person anymore. I don't know what I am.
Of course, it's a Western, so we get a lot of sunsets over large open landscapes. The vampire's life on the run is so frenetic. They are constantly racing the sunrise, almost burning to death every morning. Their scramble to cover their windows is so unglamorous and unsupernatural, so human. Emphasizing the blurry line between human and monster was another big part of why Bigelow chose not to use vampire tropes. There are no crosses or holy water or coffins or mirrors in this film. It doesn't even use the word vampire. She wanted to ground her vampires as real people as much as possible to increase the horror aspect as they become a believable part of the world. It's more terrifying to think monsters like these maybe could actually exist compared to something like the classic Dracula films with their Victorian settings, which felt so far removed from contemporary society that they weren't scary at all anymore. Bigelow compares her metaphor to going into the ocean and seeing a coral reef and realizing this is a whole ecosystem that runs parallel to our own, but we're kind of oblivious to it in our daily lives. Caleb doesn't know what he is, just that he's now part of this new world, new ecosystem that exists below the surface of the ordinary world. The vampires seem like they could be anyone on the run from the law, imitating regular people to hunt their prey. They are ferocious killers, though, toying cruelly with their victims. The violence is so extreme that the audience begins to become desensitized to it, and once you realize how slippery that slope is, the horror really sinks in. Caleb struggles with keeping his footing on this slippery morality slope. If he doesn't learn how to kill, he will die, so he wants to be able to do it to truly belong with his new family, the only family that could accept his new monstrous identity, but he simply can't bring himself to kill. He struggles between human nature and monstrous lust. He proves his devotion to the family in other ways, though, rescuing them from the police in a very classic Western shootout scene. Meanwhile, his human father has tracked him down, and when Caleb realizes how much his father truly loves him and how he took his previous life for granted, he's faced with a choice between his two families. The question the movie asks is, where is home? And is home where Caleb even wants to be? What does home truly mean?
I need a lift home. Take me home, Caleb.
Time you came home.
I gotta get home.
Get home. Be a good boy.
You kids, y'all run from home?
Sure.
Hey, that's okay by me. Sometimes home is bad.
Damn it, Daddy! No!
The word home is used 22 times in this film, and it is a sparse script dialogue-wise.
I belong here, May. My family.
Caleb chooses his good dad over his evil dad, but you can see how much the choice pains him, especially having to leave May. He's learned the consequences of his creepy, lustful behavior from the beginning of the film once he's experienced vampiric lust to the extreme, but he's grown to truly love May. Plus, he's bonded with the rest of the family enough to care for them. It's only once they later target his human sister that his emotional ties are severed and he destroys them. On a horse, in the middle of a street showdown, of course, because it's a Western. Caleb's dad uses his cow vet skills to give Caleb a blood transfusion, which turns him human again. This magic cure ties back into Bigelow's metaphor of the life and death consequences of love. Because his father gives his blood willingly to Caleb out of love, it restores Caleb's humanity. Somehow. Unlike the blood, the vampires lustfully steal from humans. We see a bit of this earlier when Caleb can't bring himself to kill and May instead feeds him from her own veins, lovingly postponing his descent into evil. Kind of Freudian in a way, as she blurs the line between lover and mother, nursing him like a baby. Later, Caleb is able to turn May human as well with this same kind of loving blood giving. The other four vampires, unfortunately, are truly evil and beyond saving. As a metaphor, they represent the kind of people in our real world who would join socially destructive supremacist organizations, who view others as inferior, as only existing to feed their desires. Vampire Dad is Jesse, a former Confederate soldier who still wears the flag in his jacket. He's old and wise, despite being utterly ruthless. Cocky vampire son Severin, on the other hand, is all tough guy id, the most extreme of obnoxious, entitled assholes. His sadistic viciousness represents what you get when a privileged white man magically becomes invulnerable, supporting Jesse's supremacist values. And if you're dubious these vampires were meant to be so political, remember who made this film. Kathryn Bigelow knows what she's about. Just last year, she gave us Detroit, all about racial injustice. And in the 1980s, with this film, she was reacting to the racist propaganda of the Reagan administration, where the prevailing image was of urban people of color as welfare abusers, leeching off the hard-working white Americans. Leeching tax dollars like leeches, or mosquitoes, or vampires. Unlike the classic trope of vampires as exotic foreigners invading civilized Western countries, she meant to show that the real vampires were the type of poor Southern whites who were still bitter about losing the war, who rallied for Reagan's welfare reform with racist fervor, to make a point about how the real monsters don't look like who the government tells us to be afraid of. 30 years later, still topical. Speaking of Westerns, we see unchecked cruelty quite similar to Severin's nowadays in shows like Westworld. When there are no consequences to violence, there's a certain type of person who goes extreme. And yet, that further emphasizes how pathetic these monsters are. They think they are some kind of top predator, alpha wolves, but really they're nothing but scavengers, desert buzzards preying on the weak and vulnerable. The film's stark, dusty scenery constantly reminds us of the isolation and emptiness of the vampire's existence. But it ends with a sunrise, a new chance to live a life of meaning without suppressing others.
I'm afraid.
Don't be. It's just the sun.
New starts can be scary, but they have love now. They'll be all right. A lot of people don't like this ending because it seems too simple, too easy, too happy, but it does work with the story's fairy tale quality, and maybe that's just what we need. It's an uncharacteristically upbeat ending for a Bigelow film, but considering how topical this movie was in the 80s and is again, still is in 2018, is looking forward to the possibility of a happy ending such a bad thing? Maybe if we work hard enough to transfuse love, there can be a sunrise on America's horizon. Maybe. I am the Maven of the Eventide, and I'm gonna go back to my coffin and keep dreaming. Thank you so much to my Patreon patrons for sponsoring this video and pretty much all of my videos. If you would like to help me make more of these videos, consider joining my Patreon. I have perks, I have rewards. If you can't join my Patreon, just like this video, subscribe to my channel, leave me comments. I love comments. Hit the alert bell on YouTube so that you actually get my updates, and I will see you in the near dark, the dusk, the eventide, the twilight. The word isn't ruined forever. We will reclaim Twilight for vampires!